Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 209. So it's been a while since we've talked to anyone that is across the pond, and we should get someone on. We should get that accent on. But do you know what? This kind of podcast interview came via kind of a mutual contact, and it's very interesting because a lot of people sometimes sort of write into the show and guests sort of try and get involved in stuff. And when this name slid across my desk, I thought, holy mother of Montreal, this guy has got such a background that it just can't be shared. And I was doing more research this morning on Mark, and it just, do you know what, it's the longest show I've ever had to prep for, because I just didn't know where to take the life experience that this man has. So anyway, I'll stop talking because he'll be far more interesting. Mark Devine, welcome to the show. Hello.
Hello, Ben. Hoo-yah. And hope you're doing well over there. You said you're sweltering in the heat and dealing with Brexit and all that, and sounds like you're doing just fine.
Well, the Brits just like to moan. It's what we do. Nothing's right. So, I'm not a moaner, I'm a positive guy, I know you are, so let's always look on the upside, glass half full, right?
Roger that, I'm with you.
Mark, I don't really like doing intros for other people. I want people to hear the passion of that person and what they've done. Now, you have an incredible background, unbelievable. Give me a little bit of the story, like what's happened, what got you into fitness, what did you do? And you'll probably have to give us the abbreviated version, because I reckon if I gave you 10 hours, you'd fill it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, you can rein me back in anytime I go down a rabbit hole, because it's definitely been known to happen. So I am from upstate New York, so East Coaster, even though I live in California now. Pretty small town, probably not unlike where you live, Ben. I mean, we were about 500 people. I spent my summers up in the Adirondack Mountains. I mean, I know most of you folks listening probably don't know the states as well as I do, of course, but the upstate New York has a 6 million acre park. It was started by Teddy Roosevelt. 6 million acres, can you imagine that? Over 5,000 freshwater lakes, and it's all protected land except for a few small towns in there and some private property. And we were just amazingly blessed to have a property on the side of a lake that had no road access, and so we had some boats to get there. And so as a youth, I used to wake up and water ski, and then do these long, like 25 to 28 mile hikes, what I now call a ruck, with my father and brother, and up and down these mountains, and we're just hoofing it. And then as I became a teen, that led to like an endurance kind of body type. I mean, I guess I was born with an endurance body, but I veered toward endurance sports. So I became a competitive swimmer in high school and college. And then, of course, with all the hiking, that naturally led to me to be a pretty decent runner. Not like a competitive runner, but I like on a lark in college, I jumped into a triathlon and won it by a long shot. And so I had a brief triathlon career, competitive swimmer, and then I got into rowing crew. So I went to a 4-year liberal arts school not too far from where I grew up, and it was called Colgate University. It's a small liberal arts school considered like a lower Ivy, that's what they call it. Only a couple thousand students, and we rowed crew there, and I swam competitively. At any rate, this is interesting, a big turning point for me. So here I am, like really small town guy. My father had a business that had been around for over 100 years, kind of handed down through the generation. It was fully expected that I would go back to this family business, and I was kind of marching along that path. But junior year, I came over to your neck of the woods. I spent a whole semester in London on a study group at the London School of Economics. And I tell you what, Ben, I mean, the power of travel. It just cracked me wide open. So when I immersed myself in English culture, and then I, toured the continent of Europe, I mean, I had never been outside of upstate New York. And it, as a young, impressionable guy, it just cracked me wide open. And the peeps I was with, my fellow peers, were all like super rock stars, 4.0 students. You had to be that way to get into the study program. And I was not. I just happened to befriend the professor who was a swimmer. And he put me on a wait list kind of out of pity. And there was a guy who was, super rock star, was supposed to go and just stopped showing up to meetings, stopped showing interest, and so the guys, the guy was Honker. So Honker put me on the list to go to Europe, and next thing you know, I'm over there. At any rate, I'm going to shorten this up. So I went from being this little small town kid, in my high school, the biggest organization was called Future Farmers of America, to now I'm in London, the financial capital of Europe, and I'm just getting exposed to all these cool ideas and places. And it kind of cracked me wide open. So when I went back to Colgate to finish up my senior year, I decided that I was going to go with my peers down in New York and get like a real professional job. And I wasn't, I might wind my way back to the family business, but I wasn't going to do that. And so next thing I know, I'm in New York City working for a company called Coopers & Lybrand, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers. It's a huge international accounting firm. And getting my MBA at the NY Stern School of Business at night, they were sponsoring me. And there I was, just cranking away 10-hour days in a suit and tie, going to school at night. And I'm thinking, how am I going to stay fit, in this environment? Like, I'm all excited about this new career, but what the heck does this mean for me? Because I was like such an athlete all through my high school and college years. And so I continued my running and triathlon, but then I took up the martial arts. And this is kind of where I'll veer off in my journey. But I got involved in a martial art where we were, doing hardcore, fight training. But then we would spend like an equal amount of intensity, not time, mind you, but an equal amount of intensity in meditative practice. And we were practicing Zen meditation. And I tell you what, this is like the second time. The first time I got cracked open was through travel and spending a deep time in your culture. And the second time was traveling inward and spending a lot of deep time, internally, just in silence and seeing what came up. And what happened and what came up for me was that, I was going completely down the wrong path. Both paths, the family business and this CPA career, were completely wrong for me. And it led me on this incredible journey to discover what was right for me. And what was right, ended up being right for me, was a career in the warrior professions, which led me into the U.S. Navy SEAL teams, which many of the listeners will know are kind of our elite maritime special ops unit. So at 25 years old, I blasted off, left behind. I finished up my MBA, CPA. In fact, I got my MBA, my CPA, and my black belt in karate, my first degree black belt in karate, all in November of 1989. And in December, first week of December, I started Officer Candidate School, took an 80% pay cut, and was off to be a Navy SEAL. So after Officer OCS, I went on to the SEAL program and graduated number one in my training class, which is no small feat. We had 185 start and 19 finish, and I was number one. And then I served for 9 years on active duty and 11 years as reserve officer and continued my training. And then, the rest of the story kind of is all around my business stuff, like where did I go with that training, and why did I decide to teach other people what I learned along the way? So we'll save that for more questions. So hopefully that wasn't too long.
It wasn't. I was expecting you to go longer. So you mentioned at 26 that you left corporate career and dived into the SEAL world. You decided to become an elite human being, basically. What was the reason? What was that environmental stimulus to completely change career?
Right. Well, I mentioned it came through the silence. It wasn't through any mentors or movies like today. There was no information really about the SEALs back then. Obviously, that's changed. But sitting on that bench, we would meditate before and after every karate class. And then we held a meditation class every Thursday night for an hour, 45 minutes of sitting, and then 15 minutes of like integration, like Dharma talk kind of thing with the grandmaster. And then, of course, that was optional. Not everyone did it. I was just really drawn to it for some reason. And then twice a year, those of us who elected to would go to a weekend-long retreat at this place called the Zen Mountain Monastery, where we would literally train karate for 6 hours a day and meditate for 6 hours a day, and then we'd eat and sleep and, help them clean dishes. It was a really wild experience. Anyway, so for someone who has spent their entire life, externally focused and just kind of following expected norms from my family and society, and this is most people's lives, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't really take time to examine what's driving your behavior and your beliefs and your thought systems. But when you sit in silence and you begin a practice like Zen, of meditation, deep contemplation, and you start to work with the information, the insights, the intuition, the instinctual drives that you're beginning to feel for the first time, because you're actually quieting yourself long enough to notice them, and because you're also looking inward instead of outward, then you begin to see patterns. And the patterns that I saw first then came from the negative perspective, right? This is the law of contrast. And so what I was feeling and experiencing was a great dislike, a growing sense of unease or dis-ease with the career choices I had made, with also the thought patterns that were driving my behavior and my decisions. And this was leading to a feeling of dissatisfaction, and you might even call it unhappiness. But I would paste over it with kind of a glib attitude, a little bit of overconfidence, which I would probably look back and say was like an arrogance, from a false confidence, where I was pretending to be more grounded and more happy and more successful than I really was feeling, and also a sense that I was living somebody else's life, which means I was living a lie when it came to my authentic self. So by really starting to dive into those negatives, right, I had to ask myself, what's on the other side, right? If not that, if that's all wrong, if everything I've done in my life has led me to a place where I'm totally questioning who I am and why I'm doing this stuff, and if it's not serving me and leading me where I need to go, or that I have this growing sense that it's not, then what's the polar opposite? Where could I find great personal peace of mind and power, and a feeling that I'm really doing the right thing and fulfilling my purpose in life and doing something that I'm passionate about, where I can wake up every day with my hair on fire and just like, that feeling of, ha, I got this, you know what I mean? And so by asking that question, which is the opposite of what's wrong, and asking what could be right, that led me to start exploring and having that confidence to say, you know what, this is my life. Screw it. I don't have to please anybody. I don't have to please my parents. I don't have to, I don't have to finish the MBA and CPA if I don't want to, even though I did. But they're all just society. They're all just letters. They're other people's measures. They don't really mean anything, and no one will care besides me. So what's right for me? Ultimately, I started to develop a personal philosophy of living, which I call personal ethos, which said I've got to live your life. You got to be deeply fulfilled, aligned with a purpose that makes sense. That is, your primal urge. It's the reason you come into this world. Everyone has it, and it's incumbent upon us to really align with it. And if you don't feel like you can align with it, at least find passion in what you do and make a difference and make it more meaningful, so that you can serve more powerfully. At any rate, so that led me to trying to redefining who I was, and from frankly no definition, just kind of like I am this guy who's going to be financially successful and take over the family business, who's an athlete, to I am a warrior and a leader, and I'm an elite warrior leader at that. And I'm going to serve that out. I'm going to fulfill that through the, eventually I found I was going to fulfill that through the elite SEAL teams. That whole process, Ben, took me about 2 years, right? It's not like I had this instantaneous flash of knowingness that I was going to go from CPA to Navy SEAL, boom, and then next month I was, running on the beaches of Coronado. It was a 2-year process.
See, for me, that's incredible, because what I was expecting actually for you to say that there was an environmental stimulus and then all of a sudden there was like an epiphany moment.
Oh.
But some of the earlier questions that I wanted to ask you within this interview very much centered around people fulfilling what they feel is their purpose.
Right.
And you were in a place where you thought you were happy, then you kind of decided you might be unhappy, and then you needed to put yourself into a place where you could truly decide where that path led. And you've just said that was a 2-year process. Now, a lot of people are scared to follow their passion, their dream, their want, their desire, this kind of lingering emotion. What advice would you give to people to kind of go down this path? Because meditation's an interesting thing. I think a lot of people are scared to meditate because they're scared to confront what is actually there, because it means that there's potential hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct there, and there's a lot to unpack. Well, first, to your question, I would say that your life depends upon this, right? If you are feeling a sense of unease or unhappiness or discomfort with where you are, who you are, and it's natural to resist the deep work that can lead to change because there is no pill, there's no course, there's no podcast, there's no book that's going to change you. External stimulus, like you alluded to, Ben, can turn you to a new path. In fact, like 9/11 was a huge external stimulus for a lot of folks in the United States who kind of did the same thing I did, but it took some planes flying into our World Trade Center to get them off their ass for them to say, okay, I'm going to do something different. You know what I mean? I'm going to go serve my country. A lot of people did that, but that was different. Some of them were doing it out of patriotism, some of them out of anger, and a lot of them really didn't belong. You know what I mean? Because they weren't doing it from the deep sense of dharma, or that's a word that just means purpose, right? They weren't doing it out of that. Now, some of them were, and so that external stimulus was good. But I think that it's more potent if you can find that stimulus from within. That intrinsic motivation to change. And the only way to get there is to go in, right? You can't get there and you can't find it externally. You can be motivated to go in through some external means like your podcast or a book or something. And a lot of people told me like my book, Unbeatable Mind or The Way of the Seal, has motivated them to go on this path. And then, of course, it's nice to be held accountable. That's why a teacher or a guide or a mentor is really helpful. But really, ultimately, you have the answers within you. There's nobody who's going to give you the answers. There's no guru, there's no priest, there's no mentor or coach who's going to give you the answers. They lie within you. And you must take the time to meditate on them. Now, meditation has largely been watered down. Not watered down. I don't want to say that because where I'm going with this is mindfulness meditation, which you've undoubtedly heard of, has become kind of a very popular form of meditation, and pretty much people think it is meditation. Well, it is a form of meditation, right? It's just one of many. And it's beneficial, right? Mindfulness meditation essentially is to begin to pay attention to what's going on. And it develops this sense of separation between self and thoughts, which is really one of the first steps to really gaining control over our mental space or interior domain, is to realize that you are not your thoughts. And so when a thought starts kind of taking over and you're just riding it and you become obsessed like OCD with it, and you can't let it go because you're just going around and around and around the wheel, which everyone has experienced, I know, and people are nodding their head going, yep, that's me. But mindfulness meditation will create a separation, right? And so I like to say, well, who's the person that's watching your thoughts? Well, of course, it's you. It's your deeper self. You might call that your unique self or essential self. I call it the witness, your witnessing self. And it's that part, it's an active part of your brain that the yogis would call your perceiving mind. It is you. So you have a perceiving mind that's always watching, that is always aware, and that is really deeply connected to your source or kind of your spiritual center, which has the information that's gonna guide you in life to where you need to go. Now, if you're blind to it, then it guides you toward lessons that try to wake you up. And if you're woken up to it, then it becomes a stream and then a river and then a freaking waterfall of abundance, toward aligned with, how you're supposed to serve and live in the world. So mindfulness helps us wake up to the fact that we are not our thoughts and that we have a deeper aspect to ourselves. But then the question is, where do we go from there? And so the true meditative path is to begin to contemplate deeply important matters, right? And you do this by asking questions. One of the most famous is, who am I, right? And you ask yourself, who am I? And you go through layers and layers and layers of external egoic structures. I am Mark, so your name, right? We identify with our name. And then I am my parents' son. Okay, I am from upstate New York. I am an MBA, CPA. I am a Navy SEAL. I am an officer. I am 6'1". I am 195 pounds. I am. You go through all those different external, those physical, those different structures until you get through that and you realize, what? at my witnessing level, I am not those things because, my witness exists without all that. And it maybe pre-existed all that. And it may, if you believe in this, supersede all that. And so who is this deeper person, beneath all that? And that's where, when we start to connect that and ask those questions and what am I meant to do? How am I meant to serve boldly in this world? Right? We can only ask those questions when we're deeply in a, silent place. I call it sacred silence. And we've disconnected from our active thinking mind. And we're in this present perceiving mind state where we're deeply connected with our intuitive subconscious. And those questions, when we ask them, when we plant them, they surface answers. And the answers show up as insight, or as a sudden, like, aha moment or knowingness or an imagery. For me, it all happened. Like, I had images have come up with me as a warrior. I had sudden, sensations that, I felt good thinking or feeling like I was a warrior. So a lot of this is a feeling state. Some of it's, words that come to you or thoughts. It's all part of our internal wisdom. I'll briefly state my thinking on how this works. Like, intuition is experienced in the mind as insight, in the heart as intuitive connection with other human beings or all of humanity, and in your belly as instinctual drives. And when we sit in meditation and we are deeply connected and present and our mind is not active in a future or past state, then all three of these, instincts, intuition, and insight, are activated. And the more you do that, the more you train to hear and to activate them, and they become more powerful. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're just getting all this information and all this, and you become much more confident with being able to interpret it. So this is what happened to me at a baby level, I would say, through my Zen training that led me into the SEALs. And then, of course, special operations training is like that on steroids. You know what I mean? We had very intense physical training followed by 14 hours of total silence in a hide site, or, in an escape hatch of a submarine, or, on a C-130 waiting for a parachute jump, and then, moments of extreme terror where we had to be, completely present and, use all of our skills and all of our senses. And so that experience in the SEAL teams really further enhanced my instinctual, intuitive, and insight capabilities, and drove me deeper to want to experience, more meditative practices and continue my training. I think I probably veered off from your question, but back to your original. I think what the original question was, a lot of people are afraid to go there, and I said, yeah, it's understandable, because if you don't know how to navigate through the inner domain and you don't have a flashlight and a guide, then it can be scary because it's new. And as soon as you sit down, your mind starts racing. And all I can say is, A, your life depends upon it. Your true life, like who you're meant to be and how you're meant to fulfill your purpose in life, depends upon you figuring that out. Otherwise, you're just going to keep being distracted. You're going to keep, on the roller coaster or the treadwheel of life, and it's just going to get worse and worse for you, and you're going to lead that life of quiet desperation that we hear. And so many people, end up in a midlife crisis or just unhealthy and unhappy. So your life depends upon it, number one. And number two, there's no real way to begin than to just sit down and learn to be comfortable in silence and to carve out time for that. So like in our physical training, we do a breath exercise before every workout. And we encourage people to spend an equal amount of time in silence and in recovery as they do in their physical training. And so we help people through fitness use fitness as a way of transformation, I guess.
Amazing. Massive fan of meditation. I just think being present and being able to communicate to one's thoughts is a very, very powerful practice. And I think the one thing that people don't really appreciate is actually this is a very personal thing. It's not like you're asking someone to go into a busy town centre and do something outside of their comfort zone where they're going to be judged by other people and be seen. This is you in your garden, feet on the ground, or just lying in bed. It's just you in your mind. That's it. No one else knows you're meditating. It's just you breathing, and your mind?
Absolutely. I mean, it really is just spending time alone, but how you spend that time alone is where it gets interesting, right? So what I teach is that first we learn how to concentrate our mind so we can really radically focus. And we use a practice I call box breathing for that. And controlling the breath is our first skill. Breath control leads to mental control, and it stills the mind. And then a mindfulness practice I call the witness process, where we begin to observe our thoughts and curate our thoughts and eliminate any negative thinking. We call it starving fear. And then curating our thoughts to be very positive, because, as you know, positivity breeds and promotes performance and momentum, and negativity develops fear and degrades our energy and degrades our performance. So that is like our second skill. And then third, we learn how to create imagery that's powerful. And so visualization is a form of meditation. So this whole process, breathing is concentration. That's the first step of meditation. And then the witness process of positivity, the second skill I call positivity, which includes this witness process and then curating your thoughts and guiding them toward positive outcomes, that is like mindfulness meditation. And then the third step is visualization. Now, visualization is when you've got a clear head and you're in a present moment. Now you create a new reality in your mind. And that new reality is with a powerful you, with a perfect, let's use a physical health metaphor, with a perfect body, like the body you're meant to have, the body that God gave you. You are in that body, and you're accomplishing what you're meant to do in life. And when you begin to visualize this way, most people say, well, I can't create the image. Well, you use your imagination first. Like I use my imagination to imagine, what could I be if I were not a CPA or not my family business? And over time, that led me to the SEALs. At first, though, it led me to different places, right? And I stayed with them until it didn't feel right. And I was, okay, that's not it. And so then when I imagined myself as a SEAL, I was like, oh my God, that's it. Because everything lined up. Everything felt good. I felt powerful. I felt right. And then I got an image of me doing things as a SEAL, which I had to create because I had one video to look at. It was a recruiting video called Be Someone Special. So I watched it like 20 times, and so then I inserted myself into that video, and then I would replay it in my mind. So that's what I call visualization. Visualization and imagination are closely related, but imagination is creating something that didn't exist in your mind, and visualization is practicing it, right? Practicing it until eventually your whole being believes that is true, right? At a neurobiological level. And then, of course, our fourth skill, these are like the core skills of mental toughness, is developing a micro-task orientation and really focusing radically on what task that I can do right now that's going to move me toward my goal and eliminate doubt, right? And so most people focus on too big a task. They think, I got this huge project, or I got to start this business, or I don't know where to go. And, oh, by the way, I've got all these other things to do. And what we say is, what's the one thing you can do today or right now, depending upon your time domain, that's going to move me toward my goal? And do it, right? And then learn from it. How did that task work? What did I learn from it? Sometimes you fail. That's okay. Failure is one of our greatest teachers. It's okay to fail. In fact, we expect to fail. SEAL team, we always expect to fail because that's where the juice is. That's where we're going to learn the lessons. That's where we're going to get closer to victory. So failure's not an option unless you allow it to stop you. So take the action, pause, breathe into it, clear your mind. What's the impact? Okay, it got, this happened, that happened, this is the effect. I'm going to readjust and reorient myself to the circumstances, decide on the next action to take that's going to move me closer to my goal, and then take that action. And so in this way, we stay really, really focused on more of a present moment, like what motion, what action, what's going to help me, achieve my mission success right now. At any rate, so there's a lot there, and yet it's very simple. You know what I mean? Like the process seems overwhelming to people to transform your life, but it's really very simple, because ultimately when you break it down, all you have is right now, and you are who you are. And so get in touch with who you really are, and then use right now to begin to move toward, where that essential nature is kind of directing you to go. and don't get too far into the future and don't obsess about the past. Just stay focused and present and, you know, just march forward toward your future, your destiny.
So I'm intrigued. As a result of all of that, do you still meditate? Is it a practice that you have within your lifestyle now? And has your meditation practice changed as you've aged, as you become more experienced?
Absolutely, yes. I do still meditate, and I would say it has changed, but it's only changed because I've learned how to do it much more effectively, and that there's different forms of meditation for different purposes. Like I said, you could. I think John Kabat-Zinn is the guy who kind of popularized mindfulness, and mindfulness comes out of I think Vedanta. I think it's Vedanta Buddhism, but someone could correct me. And what he said was, you can meditate for 20 years doing mindfulness meditation, and if you're an asshole when you start, you're going to be a bigger asshole, after 20 years. It's not the whole picture, right? It is useful. It is extremely useful. For what I found is that the combination of concentration training and mindfulness meditation has been like profoundly effective in helping me succeed in life, right? Because these are skills that allow us to be much more focused and aware when we're accomplishing our goals, right? Our outer selves become much more accomplished and focused and aware. So we can focus for longer periods of time. We can concentrate more deeply on a task. And we can appreciate when our mind is wandering and bring ourselves back to the task. So those are the three outcomes of concentration and mindfulness. But it's not enough, Ben. So that comment I made about being a bigger asshole, if that's all you do, is that you got to also do the deep work on overcoming your, what the modern psychology profession would call your shadow self. You got to do the work on the emotional mountain. So in our training, we say we got 5 mountains that we got to work on: physical mountain, the mental mountain, the emotional mountain, your intuitional mountain, and your spiritual mountain. And I don't mean that in a religious sense, but more of your willpower, your non-quitting spirit, and knowing your why, like we've been talking about for most of this podcast. That would largely be a combination of your mental, intuitional, and spiritual mountain. But that emotional mountain, boy, a lot of people just ignore that, especially men. They just don't have a way to connect to their heart, and they don't really have a way to connect deeply with other human beings, and they don't pay attention to the shadow, the stuff that's like driving their behaviors of anger or anxiety or envy or pride or jealousy or whatever it is, whatever's holding them back, right? Any lack of self-worth or anxiety around performance or lack of confidence is all really related to some past incident or performance, poor performance, or even at a deeper level, shame or abuse, at all levels, at an early childhood state. And so the true path of meditation is first to still the mind, then to learn to deeply concentrate, and then to become more mindfully aware, so that we can then sit in silence and go back into our past and to reframe anything that's not serving us, right? And I call this recapitulation. So it's one of my more advanced forms of meditative practice, but it's crucial. And, we're going to spend 2 whole days working on it with my coaching group in September. And recapitulation is where we go back and we eradicate regrets. I will say that this is not new. This is common in the warrior traditions. In fact, the legendary Toltec warriors required their young teens who were about ready to become warriors, before they could actually, kind of ascend to warrior status, they needed to recapitulate their entire life all the way back to birth. What this meant was that they had to visualize every single incident, every single interaction, every single day, and reframe anything that wasn't positive or negative, anything that was negative into a positive. Wow. And clear that emotional energy all the way back to birth, until they literally relived the birth process. And the reason for this was that they needed to be able to go into battle with a clear heart, without any emotional energy holding them back. Now, that's obviously we're not going to spend a year doing that in our modern world, but this idea of recapitulation for me is kind of baked into my evening meditation, and I call it my evening ritual, where I will recapitulate my day, and I'll go through it and just reflect upon every interaction I have, and see where the sticking points were, what went well, what didn't, celebrate the wins, but then for the things that didn't go well, I'll go back and revisualize them. I'll create an energy around gratitude for the lesson, and an insight around what I was supposed to learn, and let go of any regrets, let go of any negativity or coulda, shoulda, would haves. And when I do that, I find I sleep much better, and oftentimes I'll have more insights when I sleep. And you just let that energy go, so it doesn't hold you back. Because you can think of negative energy and regrets and these things that we kind of drag around in our past are like emotional kettlebells, and some people are dragging like hundreds and hundreds of pounds of kettlebells, emotional kettlebells around them, and it's just it gets in the way until it literally stops you in your path. It's hard to grow.
I think that's amazing. I do that in a way, but I don't quite do it how you've described it, and I'm going to go away and try, as you say, recapitulating my day and breaking it down, because, you just mentioned sleep. I reckon one of the reasons people don't sleep properly is because they sit there lying awake stewing about the negative things about their day. I've talked about a gratitude log a lot, but actually you're going into a bit more detail. You're reframing situations to create emotional ease, and I think that's really good. Now, I'm obviously concerned you've got to go soon because of our time constraints. I've got one last bit of the puzzle I want to think about, because you mentioned meditation, and meditation is only really part of the answer. Now, to connect onto meditation, how important and how valuable do you see the process of self-awareness connecting itself into greater, embodiment? Because to truly move forward, surely you have to be truly aware of what is, who you are, physical and mental, emotional.
Absolutely. I'm going to use this kind of framework. There's four things, actually there's five things that we can do and work on kind of simultaneously every day to advance our consciousness, so we can live a full life. One of them is to wake up, right? And this idea of waking up is essentially self-awareness. It's developing a self-awareness that you are not your thoughts, that you are greater than your ego and what your parents told you are. And this waking up is like the first step of most spiritual journeys, and there's plenty that is written about waking up. And so we can wake up through fitness, we can wake up through hitting bottom, we can wake up, like I said, if external event, like a lot of people woke up when at 9/11. It was really interesting. It literally just shattered them out of their paradigm and transcended them to a new place, and they went off and they were different people afterwards, and they never looked back. But waking up is also, to me, a practice, because it's easy to go, the inertia, the pull to go back to your patterns is very, very strong. And so we have to practice it every day. And so, being present in a workout, being present in relationships, and taking time to to read great things and to contemplate, and those things, those all, continue to keep you awake and to cement it into a permanent state. So waking up is critical. The second thing is growing up. Now, growing up is where we actively evolve our skills, our mental skills, our emotional skills, our intuitive skills. And so this is where the like concentration training, breath work, mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness is good for both waking up and growing. So is breathing. But a lot of these skills are good for both waking up and growing up. But then learning how to make have those difficult conversations, crucial conversations, doing training in communication and emotional development and spiritual development, silent. So this is how we grow up: is we take control of our own growth. Now, that's a unique concept for most people, as you're aware, Ben. But I think you and the work you're doing and your tribe, they get this because you're all promoting this, that we got to take responsibility for our own growth. We can't expect it to just happen. Society's not going to not going to do it. The educational system certainly isn't going to do it. If anything, it's going to hold you back, like traditional education. So you've got to take responsibility for finding a way to grow. Okay, so that's the second imperative. Now, the third is what I was recently talking about, and that is called cleaning up. Cleaning up is about eradicating past behaviors that are, that creep up on you, and it's like dropping little grenades, as you go through life. You're like, holy cow, where did that come from? And then when you do the work, the recapitulation work, you realize that came from, like for me, I was experiencing kind of like intensity and anxiety that would scare people in business meetings and stuff, and I didn't know any different, but people would tell me, and I realized that came from my father's anger and frequent outbursts, and he had kind of a rage, and so I took that on, but I'd done a lot of work to where I didn't feel it the way he felt it, but I had this intensity that was like came out of me emotionally that kind of scared people. And when I did the recapitulation work, I was able to release that energy because it was actually more of a nervous system energy. It wasn't cognitive. So that's all what I mean by cleaning up. We clean up our past so that we can go boldly into the future. And as we wake up and grow up, then that future becomes more clear and more powerful. Now, the fourth is opening up. This is the intuitive place. And we talked earlier in the podcast about opening up to insight, instinct, and intuition. And this also comes from deep spiritual practices, silence, contemplation, time in nature, surfing, climbing a mountain alone. And being able to open up to the oneness of all things, being able to open up to the interconnectedness between human beings. And when you open up, that's when you start to feel peace. It's when you evolve beyond, tribal identities, national identities, and you begin to experience a love for all humanity, right? And you become more world-centric in your approach. And if everyone could open up on this planet, then, it'd be a very different place, obviously. And then the fifth imperative is to show up. And what I mean by that is show up with your full power. Show up and don't give up. You know what I mean? Kick ass and take names, right? If you're going to be a Navy SEAL in life, then you got to wake up, grow up, clean up, open up, and then show up with your gloves on and just hit the mat. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and hopefully people have picked up enough information from you today and they know what you mean as well. I think for a lot of people, what would benefit them is actually going back and re-listening to this podcast, because I think a lot of what you've said is going to have almost made people think, and now they actually probably, I think, need to go back and re-listen to this podcast and actually take note of the tangibles that you've asked them to do. Mm-hmm. A lot of us are quite passive when we listen to podcasts. Well, this is something where you actually need to immerse yourself into and really go all in. Like you said, we need to go in on this. It's not a work out scenario, it's a work in. Mark, your time's been amazing today. Thank you very much for sharing this stuff. I've got through 2 questions out of mine. I didn't even get into the physical or anything like that. So if you have the time in the future, I would love to do a part 2. I know you're a busy man. I'll work around your schedule. I think people would benefit from some of the other stuff that I'd like to go into on the physical. So please let me know about that. I don't want to put you under pressure on air and think you've got to say yes. You might need to contextualize how this went today and ask yourself if you want to come back.
Well, I tell you what, I know the answer. I'd love to come back because we're just getting warmed up. But I would give your, in fact, I have one right here. I would give your listeners a reading assignment, and that would be to read Unbeatable Mind, which is my self-published book. That is kind of like the best place to start to kind of like learn a little bit more about some of the concepts we talked about. And then we'll come back and have a conversation about that with maybe take some questions from some of your listeners, and we'll dive into it. That would be a lot of fun, huh?
That would be awesome. Right, you've got a book, Unbeatable Mind. That is one way people can get more in touch with your work. Tell people that want to find you elsewhere, websites, Twitter, other books. Let them know now where they can find more information about you and your work.
Okay, I do think the best place is to, if you're trying to learn a new framework or philosophy, is a book. So Unbeatable Mind, available Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's a self-published book, but I think it's, it sounds awkward, but I think it's good. I think it's a lot. I've heard some great feedback from it. And then the second one is called The Way of the Seal. This was published by Reader's Digest. And this is really neat because Unbeatable Mind is really more about focusing on how to organize your inner domain. This is about how to use the skills to lead powerfully in the world. they're kind of complementary books. I have a yoga book out called Kokoro Yoga. So if any of your listeners are into yoga, I teach yoga as a personal practice, not a group, spandex hot yoga type workout. And so it's a really neat way to take some of the ideas and actually work with the practical tools of meditation, concentration, breath control, and visualization, and some movement. So it's all there. My business, I have two businesses. One's called Seal Fit, SEALFIT, and that's like our hard-hitting crucible training. And it's transformational, but you got to be ready for it physically. And we have had a ton of Brits come over. Is that the right way? Is that that's not offensive to say Brits?
No.
Okay. We've had a ton of you guys and ladies come over and do that program. We have a 50-hour nonstop event, the model after the Navy SEAL Hell Week. It's 50 hours of nonstop training, no sleep, round the clock. It's amazing. And we teach all these skills through this training, through the physical hard work. And then I have an executive coaching program and an online course around the mental skills of Unbeatable Mind, and that's at unbeatablemind.com. That's enough.
That is enough. Right, everyone. Mark has been an amazing guest. Please, throughout the course of, once this podcast goes live, get in touch with us and let us know what you think. Tag us both in on Twitter. Mark is on Twitter at Mark Divine. That's DIVINE. You can also tag in SealFit. Look, throw him a compliment, tell him what you think, ask a question. It's really nice to get feedback when we do these interviews of how it's touched people, how it's potentially changed and where it's helping you lead your life. Grab and check out Mark's books. They both look incredible. Mark, again, thank you very much for your time today. It's been amazing. Once the show comes out, guys, please tag friends in that you think it would benefit them. Share it, like it. You know the work. We can only help more people if you help us spread the message. Hoo-ha. Right. Hoo-ha. Or is it woo-ha?
Hoo-yah.
Hoo-yah. See, that's when...
I think the British SES is woo-ha. Navy SEALs are hoo-yah.
Yeah.
I'm just joking. Yeah.
Us Brits are good at butchering things. Right, that's Mark out. That's me out. You know the drill. Take care, everyone, and stay awesome. Hey, everyone. Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 208. Now, this is a quick Monday show. I'm going to rattle through a question